El Mencho, the avocado farmer who became the most wanted man alive, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, was born in 1966 in the small mountain town of Aguililla in the Mexican state of Michoacán. His family had nothing, a dirt floor, 5 brothers, a future that looked like his father's, picking avocados on hillsides for men who would never learn his name. He dropped out of school at 10 years old. By 14, he was guarding marijuana fields for those same men. Standing in the mountains with a weapon, at some point in his late teens, he decided the mountains weren't big enough. He crossed the border illegally into California and found work in the only industry that was hiring men with his skill set, the drug trade. Within a few years, federal agents had his name. He was arrested in San Francisco at 19 for stolen property and carrying a loaded firearm, then again for selling narcotics. Then federal heroin charges came down alongside his brother Abraham. To keep his brother from spending his life in a federal cell, he pleaded guilty and took 5 years. He served 3. Then the government deported him back to Mexico. He was 30 years old. Back in Mexico, he joined the military police in Jalisco, learned how law enforcement operated from the inside, then quit and walked directly into the Millennium Cartel. He married the sister of a cartel clan leader and began climbing the kind of ladder where the men above you have a habit of disappearing. In 2010, he founded the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the CJNG. What he built was not a street gang. It was a military organization. Under his command, his men shot down army helicopters with rocket launchers. They assassinated federal judges. They detonated car bombs outside government buildings and launched drone strikes against police convoys. The Mexican government declared him the most dangerous criminal in the country. The United States put a $15 million bounty on his head, the highest ever offered for a drug trafficker. Fewer than a handful of confirmed photographs of him existed. He moved between safe houses protected by 400 armed soldiers and surrounded by landmines. On February 22, 2026, Mexican special forces received intelligence on his location and moved on a property. He had hosted a gathering there the night before. His security detail was not at full alert. When the soldiers breached the compound, Mencho ran. He made it into the surrounding woodland, wounded, before they closed the distance. He died before the helicopter reached the hospital. Within hours of the announcement, burning vehicles blocked highways across 20 Mexican states. The city of Guadalajara went silent. The cartel's communication network sent a single message. The organization would continue. The boy who had spent his childhood in the avocado fields of Michoacán had built something so large that even his death couldn't stop it from moving. Kun Sa, the opium king who died in his bed. Zhang Chifu was born in 1934 in a remote village called Loi Ma, deep in the Shan state of Burma, a mountainous region with no schools, no hospitals, and no economy outside of what grew in the soil. His father, a Chinese nationalist soldier, died when he was 3 years old. His mother died 2 years after that. He was 5 years old and had no parents, no education, and no one coming to rescue him. His grandfather raised him in the only way the region allowed, teaching him to survive. By 16, Zhang had formed his first armed gang from the young men around him. He gave himself a new name, Kun Sa, which meant prosperous prince in the Shan language, and began learning the only trade available in the Golden Triangle, opium. In his early 20s, he fell in with Chinese nationalist soldiers who had retreated into Burma after losing the civil war in China. They were disciplined, experienced, and already running narcotics through the mountain passes. Kun Sa studied them closely. In 1963, the Burmese government made him an offer that defined the next 3 decades of his life: suppress the local communist rebels, and in return, they would let him use government roads to move his opium across the country. He accepted. He was given weapons, vehicles, and authority. Within years, he had used all 3 to make himself one of the most powerful warlords in Southeast Asia. In 1967, a rival army ambushed his caravan in the mountains and stole an entire shipment of opium. 2 years later, the Burmese government arrested him on treason charges and locked him in Mandalay prison for 5 years. Kun Sa spent his time in prison reading. Specifically, he read Sun Tzu's Art of War repeatedly and came out of that cell with a clearer strategic mind than the one that had entered it. After his release, he rebuilt everything from scratch, this time more deliberately. He relocated his base of operations to Thailand, recruited aggressively, and constructed what became known as the Mong Thai Army. 20,000 soldiers, multiple heroin refineries operating across the jungle, and a distribution network that supplied nearly half of all the heroin entering the United States at its peak. The DEA tested his product and found it to be 90% pure, a level of refinement that most producers couldn't achieve. Washington put a $2 million bounty on his head. Kun Sa responded by offering to sell his entire annual opium harvest directly to Western governments in exchange for economic development aid for the Shan people. He made the offer twice. Both times, the governments refused. He kept producing. By the mid-1990s, rival Shan armies and increasing Burmese military pressure had closed in from multiple directions. In 1996, Kun Sa made a private arrangement with the Burmese military. He would surrender his army and stand down, and in exchange, he would face no extradition, no trial, no prison, and no charges of any kind. The Burmese government agreed. He moved to Yangon with his accumulated fortune, settled into a comfortable home, and spent his remaining years living quietly. He died in 2007 at the age of 73 from diabetes and heart disease. Felix Mitchell, the man who kept Oakland alive. Mitchell Jr. was born in 1954 and grew up in the Brookfield Village housing projects on 69th Avenue Avenue in East Oakland, California. East Oakland in the 1960s and 70s was a place the city's resources rarely reached. Underfunded schools, no jobs, streets that the police treated as somewhere to contain rather than serve. Felix looked at those streets and decided that if the system wasn't going to provide a way forward, he would build his own. He dropped out of high school and in his late teens pulled together a crew of young men from his block. He called them the 69 Mob. What started as petty crime, theft, small-time dealing, running angles on the neighborhood evolved quickly into something no one in the Bay Area had seen before. Felix connected with suppliers in Los Angeles and Detroit, established consistent product, and built the first large-scale, centrally organized street drug operation in the history of the Bay Area. He ran it like a business. His heroin was stamped in small envelopes marked with the number 69 so buyers knew exactly what they were getting and who it came from. He placed children on street corners as lookouts and runners, young enough that the law couldn't touch them, old enough to be useful. He set prices, controlled territory, and responded to any rival who moved onto his ground. At his peak, the 69 Mob was generating close to $1 million every month. With that money, Felix Mitchell lived in a way that East Oakland had never seen from one of its own. Rolls Royces, custom jewelry, parties that the neighborhood talked about for weeks. But he also spent it back into the community that made him. Turkeys delivered to families who couldn't afford Thanksgiving. Money funneled into youth programs. In a neighborhood that the city had written off, Felix Mitchell was the one funding things. Before his sentencing, he sat across from his probation officer. He said, "I like money, I like jewelry, I like fine cars, and I went out and got them. Isn't that the American way?" In 1985, Felix Mitchell was convicted under federal kingpin statutes, the same laws designed to dismantle organized crime families. The judge called it a reign of terror and handed him life without the possibility of parole. He was 31 years old. He spent just over a year at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary before an inmate stabbed him multiple times in his cell on August 21st, 1986, 2 days before his 32nd birthday. The dispute was over $10. He died that night. His funeral became something Oakland had never seen. A horse-drawn carriage carried his bronze casket through 8 miles of city streets. Rolls Royces and limousines followed behind it. 8,000 people lined the route to watch him pass. But the story didn't end at the funeral. After Felix Mitchell was gone, the structure he had maintained, the single organization, the controlled prices, the enforced territorial boundaries, collapsed with him. Dozens of smaller crews went to war over what he had left behind. Violence in East Oakland exploded to levels the city hadn't seen before. Criminologists studying the aftermath gave it a name: the Felix Mitchell Paradox. The man people had called a reign of terror had, without anyone realizing it, been the one thing keeping the streets from getting worse. Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the Lord of the Skies, who vanished. Amado Carrillo. Fuentes was born in 1956 in Guamuchil, Sinaloa, into a family that already had one foot inside the narco world. His father was a farmer. His uncle was Don Nito, one of the founding figures of the Guadalajara Cartel, the organization that had built the template for modern Mexican drug trafficking. Amado grew up watching how it worked from the inside, and by his teens, he had left home with a 6th grade education and a clear sense of where he was going. He served his apprenticeship under Pablo Acosta, one of the most ruthless traffickers on the US-Mexico border, learning the mechanics of moving cocaine across checkpoints and through corridors. When he had learned enough, he moved up. He began working alongside Rafael Aguilar Guajardo, the man who controlled the Juarez Corridor, one of the most valuable drug trafficking routes into the United States. In 1993, Amado decided the corridor should belong to him. Then he took everything Aguilar had built and reorganized it under his own name. What he did next put him in a different category from every trafficker who had come before him. He bought more than 30 Boeing 727 aircraft, stripped out every seat, and converted them into cargo planes capable of carrying up to 15 tons of cocaine. At the height of his operation, he was moving so much product so fast that the DEA ran out of accurate language to describe it. They called him El Señor de los Cielos, the Lord of the Skies. He was worth an estimated $25 billion. Almost no photographs of him existed. He did not dress like a cartel boss. He dressed like a businessman. He traveled quietly and spoke carefully and made sure that the people who knew his name had reasons to protect it. By 1997, that careful construction was starting to fracture. U.S. indictments had been filed. The general who had provided him military protection had been arrested. Federal agents came within meters of catching him at his own sister's wedding before he slipped out. He understood that the man he had been could no longer exist safely. So on July 4th, 1997, he checked into a hospital in Mexico City under a false name and underwent 8 hours of reconstructive surgery. His face reshaped. He was wheeled out of the operating room and into a recovery room. By morning, he was dead. The official cause was listed as complications from the anesthesia. 4 months later, the 3 surgeons who had performed the procedure, each sealed inside a steel barrel, their bodies showing signs of prolonged torture before death. His cousin told journalists that Amado was fine, that he was alive, that the body had been misidentified. identified. The DEA compared the sightings and rumors that followed to Elvis Presley. No confirmed photograph of him after July 4th, 1997. The Lord of the Skies had either died on an operating table trying to become someone else, or had succeeded so completely at disappearing that even the world's most resourced law enforcement agencies have never found the answer. Griselda Blanco, the Black Widow's final mourning. Griselda Blanco was born in 1943 in Cartagena, Colombia, and grew up in the slums of Medellin in a childhood so violent her mother worked as a prostitute. The men who came through the house were not kind. She ran away before she was old enough to have had any other options. By her 20s, she had married a small-time criminal, had 3 sons, and was already moving. She and her second husband, Alberto Bravo, built a cocaine smuggling operation in Queens, New York. Their method was precise. Female couriers carrying drugs into the country, concealed in specially designed undergarments. The pipeline ran directly from Colombia to New York, and it worked. Then Griselda suspected Alberto Bravo of stealing from her. She didn't hire someone. She shot him dead herself in front of their 5-year-old son. Her third husband was also eventually killed on her orders. People in the trade started calling her the Black Widow. In the late 1970s, she moved the operation to Miami and scaled it to a size that redefined what cocaine trafficking looked like in the United States. Her network was pushing $8 million worth of cocaine through the city every single month. She introduced a new style of killing, the motorcycle assassination. Her gunmen on motorbikes pulled alongside targets in traffic and opened fire before disappearing into the city. The tactic spread through Miami's underworld and became standard. In 1979, her men carried out the Deadliest Mall massacre, opening fire in broad daylight inside a shopping center in front of hundreds of civilians. Authorities would eventually connect her to over 40 murders. She was arrested in 1985 and convicted on drug trafficking charges, receiving 15 years. While incarcerated, prosecutors built a murder case against her. It collapsed when her star witness, her own former hitman, was caught having explicit phone conversations with secretaries in the prosecutor's office, and his credibility was destroyed overnight. She pleaded guilty to 3 counts of second-degree murder, received a concurrent 20-year sentence, and walked out of prison in 2004 at the age of 60. She was deported to Colombia and settled quietly in Medellin. For 8 years, she lived there without incident. She opened a children's clothing boutique. She attended church. Neighbors said she kept to herself. On September 3rd, 2012, Griselda Blanco stepped out of a butcher shop in the Belen neighborhood of Medellin. A man on a motorcycle pulled up to the curb and shot her twice in the head. She was 69 years old. She had introduced the motorcycle assassination to Miami 3 decades earlier. She died by one on a quiet street in the city where she had been born. Pablo Escobar. The day the rooftop run. Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1st, 1949, in Rio Negro, Colombia, the third of 7 children. His father was a farmer. His mother was a school teacher. They were not wealthy, but they were not the worst off in a country where being poor often meant having nothing at all. Pablo grew up in Medellin and from an early age seemed to understand one thing about the world more clearly than most people around him. Money changed everything, and he intended to have it. He dropped out of school as a teenager and started small. He stole tombstones from cemeteries, sanded the inscriptions off, and resold them as new to grieving families who didn't know the difference. He moved stolen cars, he forged university diplomas, he kidnapped a prominent businessman, collected a ransom, and then killed the man anyway. By his mid-20s, Pablo Escobar had established the only rule he intended to live by: take what you want and make sure the cost of stopping you is higher than anyone is willing to pay. In the mid-1970s, he founded the Medellin Cartel and began processing cocaine sourced from Peru and Bolivia in jungle laboratories, then flying it into the United States through a network of pilots, customs officials, and distributors. The operation grew faster than the Colombian or American governments understood was possible. By the early 1980s, the Medellin Cartel was moving between 70 and 80 tons of cocaine into the United States every single month and controlling an estimated 80% of the global cocaine supply. Forbes magazine put Pablo Escobar on its list of the 10 wealthiest people on Earth. His personal net worth was estimated at $30 billion. In Medellin, he built schools, paved roads, constructed hospitals, and funded the construction of an entire neighborhood called Barrio Pablo Escobar for the city's poorest residents. He handed out money at football matches. He ran for Congress and won a seat. The people of Medellin's slums called him Don Pablo. Some called him Robin Hood. He was the man who had come from nothing and come back with everything, and he had shared enough of it that hundreds of thousands of people genuinely loved him. The Colombian government eventually decided that the cost of leaving him alone was higher than the cost of confronting him. When the justice minister publicly exposed his cartel connections, Escobar had him assassinated. Then he ordered the killing of a presidential candidate. Then he bombed Avianca Flight 203, targeting a single individual he believed was on board, killing all 107 people on the plane. The target wasn't even on the flight. In 1991, with extradition to the United States looming, Escobar negotiated his own surrender on terms that only a man of his power could have proposed. He would go to prison, but he would build the prison himself. La Catedral sat on a hilltop outside Medellin, equipped with a football field, a bar, a jacuzzi, and guest rooms for visitors. He ran the cartel from inside it. When Colombian authorities finally attempted to transfer him to a real facility in 1992, he simply walked out. He He had been in his custom prison for 13 months. The manhunt that followed lasted 16 months. A joint Colombian-American task force tracked him through safe house after safe house across Medellin. He moved constantly, rarely spending 2 consecutive nights in the same location, communicating by radio in short bursts to avoid triangulation. On December 1st, 1993, his 44th birthday, he called his son Juan Pablo from a safe house in the Los Olivos neighborhood of Medellin. He stayed on the line long enough. Search block operators pinpointed the signal, and within hours, security forces surrounded the building. Escobar ran. He made it onto the rooftops and moved between them, trying to find a way down and a way out. He was shot in the torso, then the legs. A final bullet entered behind his right ear. Whether it was fired by the soldiers closing in or by Escobar himself has never been definitively established. He fell on a rooftop in Medellin, a few miles from where he had grown up. 25,000 people attended his funeral. Mourners pulled at his clothes and hair. Some prayed over his casket as though he were a saint. The Medellin cartel collapsed within months of his death, fractured by rivals who had been waiting for exactly this moment. But the cocaine trade he had built didn't collapse with him. It adapted. It found new routes, new organizations, new faces. The industry Escobar had turned into a global enterprise was never going to end with one man on a rooftop. It just found someone else to run it. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe and drop your suggestions in the comments.